The sirens didn't just go off in Tel Aviv last night. They went off in Riyadh, in Dubai, in Doha. Air defense systems across the entire Gulf region lit up the sky at the same time. Saudi Arabia issued emergency warnings across the country, including the capital. Kuwait activated its defenses. Bahrain went on high alert. Qatar scrambled its air force. And in the middle of all of this, while missiles were still in the air, Iran delivered a message that wasn't aimed at a radar system or a military base. It was aimed at the kings and princes sitting in their palaces, watching the sky burn. The message was simple, brutal, and calculated. Sooner or later, America will leave this region by accepting defeat, and you will stay. That sentence was spoken publicly by Iran's ambassador to Pakistan just days ago. It wasn't a slip, it wasn't a threat made in anger. It was a warning delivered with the cold precision of a country that believes it is winning a psychological war, even while absorbing bombs. If you think this conflict is only about Iran versus America, you've been watching the wrong story. The real story is what Iran is doing to the Gulf states, and it should terrify every government between Kuwait and Oman. If this kind of analysis matters to you, the kind the mainstream doesn't explain, subscribe before this video ends. It takes 2 seconds and it keeps content like this alive. Here is the number that changes everything. 83%. That is the percentage of Iranian missiles and drones in this conflict that have been aimed not at Israel, but at the Gulf Cooperation Council states. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman. Only 17% of Iran's firepower has targeted Israel. Read that again. Iran is hitting its Arab neighbors nearly 5 times more than it is hitting the country that started bombing it. This is not a miscalculation. This is the strategy. The UAE alone has absorbed more than 2,000 Iranian missile and drone attacks since this war began. That is not a country being punished for attacking Iran. That is a country being sent a message, delivered in warheads, about what the future will look like if it keeps sheltering American forces and maintaining ties with Israel. Kuwait has been hit nearly 1,000 times. Saudi Arabia more than 800. The Aramco oil refineries in Saudi Arabia have been struck. Riyadh International Airport has been targeted. The U.S. Embassy compound in Riyadh itself was hit. These are not accidents of war. These are chosen targets selected to maximize political pressure on governments that thought they could sit on the sidelines. There are no sidelines anymore. Now understand what happened to Qatar, because this part of the story is almost impossible to believe. Qatar spent years as the region's great mediator. It was the country that talked to everyone: Iran, Hamas, the United States, Israel. It hosted American military forces at Al Udeid Air Base, one of the largest U.S. military installations in the world. And at the same time, it maintained diplomatic back channels with Tehran. Qatar genuinely believed that being neutral, being useful, being the peacemaker would protect it. It was wrong. Iran struck Qatar's Ras Laffan industrial complex, the beating heart of the world's second-largest LNG producer. The attacks wiped out 17% of Qatar's total LNG production capacity. 17%. Gone. Damage that experts say will take 3 to 5 years to repair. Qatar was forced to declare force majeure on major energy supply contracts with Belgium, China, Italy, and South Korea. Qatar Airways, one of the world's premier airlines, was grounded. Residential areas in Doha were struck. The Qatari foreign minister, a man who had built his country's entire identity around diplomacy and mediation, went on television and said something he never thought he would say. This cannot go unanswered. A price has to be paid. The great mediator had just become a combatant, and Tehran watched it happen with satisfaction, because Iran had just proved something it has been trying to prove for 40 years, that in this region there is no neutrality. There is only alignment with Iran, or consequences. Here is what makes Iran's warning to the Gulf states so dangerous. It isn't just words. Iran has now spent weeks demonstrating exactly what those consequences look like, and the Gulf states are discovering that their defenses, while capable, are not infinite. Gulf air defense systems have performed well against ballistic missiles, but Iran has also been launching swarms of drones, cheaper, slower, harder to track in large numbers. Drone swarms overwhelm interceptors through sheer volume. You can't fire $1 million missile at every $30,000 drone. The math doesn't work. And Iran knows the math doesn't work. A single Iranian strike on Qatar's South Pars gas field, which Qatar shares with Iran as the North Dome, sent a particular kind of chill through the region. Tehran was telling Doha, "We share a gas field with you. We know exactly where it is, and we will destroy it if we choose to." That is not a military threat. That is an existential economic threat, delivered by a neighbor who will still be your neighbor when this war ends. Now hear what the Gulf leaders are actually saying behind closed doors, because the public statements are careful and diplomatic. The private reality is panic. Senior officials in the UAE have said publicly that the war must end with a long-term solution for Gulf security. What they mean privately is this: We no longer trust America to be here when we need it most. Saudi Arabia went to extraordinary lengths over the past 5 years to rehabilitate its relationship with Iran. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman quietly accommodated Iranian concerns. Saudi delegations met Iranian delegations. The rivalry that had destabilized the entire region seemed to finally be cooling down. And then the bombs came. A senior Saudi researcher described the feeling inside the kingdom this way. Saudi Arabia had invested in Iran, defended Iran's position, tried to accommodate Tehran's concerns. And for Iran to strike Saudi Arabia anyway, that created a sentiment of complete betrayal. All that diplomatic work destroyed. Now Mohammed bin Salman has reportedly ordered his military to directly engage Iranian forces that approach Saudi territory. The man who was trying to normalize with Tehran 3 months ago is now shooting at Iranian aircraft. This is the transformation Iran's warning is designed to prevent, but Iran's own attacks are accelerating it. Here is the deeper game Tehran is playing, and you have to understand this to understand the warning. Iran does not expect America to leave the Gulf tomorrow. Iran expects America to leave eventually. History is Tehran's argument. The United States left Vietnam. It left Afghanistan. It left Iraq in stages. Every time America has waged a sustained war in a region where it had no vital national interest, public pressure, economic cost, and political will eventually combined to produce withdrawal. Iran is betting this war follows the same pattern. And if it does, when American forces pack up and depart, the Gulf states will still be there, 60 miles from Iran across the water. They will still need to trade. They will still need to coexist. Their desalination plants will still be within range of Iranian missiles. Their oil infrastructure will still be visible from Iranian drones. Iran's ambassador didn't just deliver a threat when he said, "America will leave and you will stay." He delivered a geography lesson. The Gulf states cannot be relocated. America can be. That is the long-term leverage Iran is establishing right now, with every missile it fires at a Qatari LNG terminal or a Saudi oil refinery. Not to destroy them permanently, but to remind the Gulf that Iran can destroy them permanently, whenever it chooses. The ceasefire agreement announced just days ago is fragile in ways that should worry everyone. Within hours of the announcement, missiles were still flying. Gulf air defenses were still intercepting threats. Iran's Supreme National Security Council issued a statement that should have been read as the warning it was. Our hands are on the trigger, and the moment the enemy makes the slightest mistake, it will be met with full force. That is not the language of a country that has decided to make peace. That is the language of a country that has agreed to pause, while keeping the weapon loaded. Iran's formal ceasefire proposal contained demands that tell you everything about what Tehran actually wants. The withdrawal of all U.S. combat forces from military bases across the region, financial reparations, the lifting of all sanctions, the right to continue nuclear enrichment. America called those demands ridiculous. Iran called America's counterproposals a wish list. Neither side is close to agreement on the fundamental question, which is not missiles or nuclear weapons, but who controls the Middle East when this is over. The Gulf states are now trapped in a position they never wanted and cannot easily escape. They are hosting American forces, which makes them legitimate targets in Tehran's logic. They have been forced into open military cooperation with Israel and the United States, something Iran describes as a betrayal of the Arab and Muslim world. And they know that if America eventually cuts a deal with Iran, or simply withdraws, they will be left facing a Tehran that remembers exactly who helped the Americans. The Saudi-Pakistan Mutual Defense Agreement signed earlier this year tells you something. So does the military cooperation agreement between Egypt and Turkey. So does the discussion of a four-way security pact between Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Turkey, and Egypt. The Gulf states are quietly building a backup plan, a defense architecture that doesn't depend entirely on American protection, because they have watched this war unfold and drawn a conclusion that Washington doesn't want to hear. America may not always be there. One attack captures the terror of this moment better than any political speech. Iran struck a desalination plant in Bahrain on March 8th. A desalination plant. Not a military base, not an oil terminal. A facility that turns seawater into drinkable water for a population that has no other source of fresh water. Gulf experts who had been carefully analyzing Iranian targeting patterns went quiet after that strike. Because what Iran was signaling was not just military capability. It was the willingness to make Gulf cities literally uninhabitable. Without desalination, there is no water. Without water, there are no people. Iran was saying, "We know where your survival infrastructure is, and we can reach it." No statement from any ambassador is more powerful than that single missile on that single plant. Here is where this ends, or doesn't end. Iran has promised to continue until American and Israeli attacks on its territory stop. America has stated it is accelerating, not slowing, its strikes on Iran. Israel has conducted more than 600 strikes on Iranian targets in the first 4 days of this war alone. Both sides are climbing. neither is looking for the off-ramp. And the Gulf states are stuck in the middle, absorbing 83% of Iran's firepower, watching their energy infrastructure get dismantled piece by piece, privately furious at Washington for ignoring their warnings, for following Israel's strategy into a war that is burning the Gulf's prosperity alongside Iran's cities. UAE Presidential Advisor Anwar Gargash, the man who spent years building the Gulf-Iran rapprochement, said it plainly. Iran's attacks confirm the narrative of those who always saw Tehran as the region's primary source of instability. All the years of diplomatic work, gone, replaced by something that will take decades to rebuild, if it ever rebuilds at all. The Gulf states understood better than anyone that they have to live next to Iran forever. They tried to make peace with that reality. Iran just destroyed that peace, and then had the audacity to warn the Gulf that America is temporary. Here is the bitter irony. Iran is right. America is not a permanent presence in the Gulf. Every American president eventually faces the question of whether the cost is worth it. Trump has already said publicly that countries which rely on the Strait of Hormuz should go protect it themselves. That sentence from the American president is more alarming to Gulf leaders than anything Iran's ambassador said. Because if America doesn't need the Gulf, and the Gulf can't protect itself without America, and Iran is sitting across the water with thousands of missiles and a long memory, then who exactly is going to be left alone when this is over? That question doesn't have a comfortable answer. And right now, somewhere in Riyadh, in Abu Dhabi, in Doha, leaders who built their countries into gleaming symbols of wealth and modernity are staring at that question in the dark, waiting to see which way it falls.